The DA has reversed its position of the state of the nation of disaster, announcing that it will challenge it in court after previously calling for one to be declared. Meanwhile, opposition of the state of disaster is growing, with NUMSA announcing a legal bid on Monday to halt the government's decision. The DA is taking the electricity national state of disaster declaration to court after previously urging President Cyril Ramaphosa to declare one to deal with Eskom's energy crisis. In his State of the Nation address last week, President Cyril Ramaphosa declared an electricity state of disaster to deal with the load-shedding crisis. His announcement came after several role players, including the traditional leaders and community-based organizations, called for the crisis to be declared a national state of disaster and was reiterated at the ANC's Legotla in January. The DA had already briefed its legal team to challenge the decision in court before Ramaphosa finished his speech. A national state of disaster under the guise of dealing with the load-shedding crisis will similarly empower the ANC to abuse procurement processes and issue nonsensical regulations that have nothing to do with the electricity crisis. The DA will not sit back and allow the ANC to use the electricity disaster it created to loot and further abuse the people of South Africa, said DA leader John Steenhuisen in a statement. He claimed that the DA had already filed a case in court in 2021 to declare the Disaster Management Act unconstitutional, and that it would now do the same to prevent an ANC looting frenzy following Ramaphosa's declaration of an energy state of disaster. However, Steenhuisen's November 2022 address appears to contradict his current position. Steenhuisen urged Ramaphosa to declare a ring-fenced state of the nation disaster around Eskom on November 23rd. This should have been done months ago when he presented his energy response plan, and his refusal to admit the urgency and scale of the disaster at the time has now left our grid on the verge of collapse, Steenhuisen said. This state of disaster must be declared immediately so that disaster relief funding can be reprioritized in order to keep the open circle turbines running in the short term, the November 2022 statement continues. But more importantly, declaring a state of the nation disaster will allow the government to avoid its own self-imposed roadblocks, bottlenecks, and cost increases in the form of unworkable labor legislation, localization requirements, cadre deployment, and preferential procurement. A DA's shadow minister for cooperative governance and traditional affairs insisted that the positions were not in conflict. What the DA has called for is a ring-fenced set of interventions at Eskom, not a national state of disaster under which the government can exercise broad powers unrelated to Eskom, he explained. Brink added that the state of disaster was not tailored to deal with specific challenges at Eskom, but gives the cooperative governance and traditional affairs minister and other ministers wide-ranging powers to make laws without parliamentary supervision. He urged that it would be preferable to bring to parliament a package of disaster measures addressing the situation at Eskom as allowed by Section 44, Part 2 of the Constitution. According to Presidency spokesperson Vincent Mangwenya, the President responded boldly to the energy crisis in terms of the capacity to resolve the challenges through the appointment of an electricity minister in the Presidency and the declaration of the state of disaster. Mangwenya stated that finger-pointing or politically motivated court actions were not appropriate at this time. In consultations with business, labor, interfaith leaders, community organizations, and the Presidential Coordinating Council, President Ramaphosa was urged to take bold measures that will effectively deal with the current electricity crisis. Some of those calls were specific to the declaration of the state of disaster, said Mangwenya, referring to the Western Cape Premier Alan Wind and Cape Town Mayor Jordan Hill-Lewis, both senior DA leaders. Wind, like Steenhuisen, wrote to Ramaphosa last month requesting the declaration of a state of disaster. Existing legislation and contingency arrangements, in our opinion, do not adequately provide for a national executive to deal effectively with the disaster, Wind wrote.